Thank you, Isan. Minister, Director Generals, dear members, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our Annual Congress and General Assembly. We were supposed to come together in Geneva last June, and we are finally bringing this event to your homes and offices across Europe and beyond, live stream from this amazing place. I'd like here, of course, first to thank Arno Feest and the whole team at Brussels Airport for making this possible. I think, Arno, very clearly this year you've saved our annual event. I'd like to thank our sponsors as well. I know you're going through a difficult time just like us, so believe me, your support is more appreciated than ever. And indeed, the past months have been challenging for all of you, professionally, but also very often personally. And as ACI Europe, we have and continue to do our utmost to stand by your side, helping both our airport members and our world business partners navigating these unprecedented times. I'd like here to thank the ACI Europe team for their hard work over these past months. Each of you has gone the extra mile to serve our members better. Today, it's about taking stock of where we stand as an industry, but as Arno has said, it's also about charting the way forward, looking at what will be the new normal, how we can reinvent our business. And this is precisely what I'd like to do now for you with the state of the industry as an introduction and setting the scene for the interviews and the discussions ahead. So please follow me, looking of course first at the shock of COVID-19 on our industry. Air traffic has been going into free fall. Freight kind of escaped the devastation because we needed to keep goods and supplies running, but actually freight only contributes very marginally to airport revenues. We make our money from the passengers, and as you can see, passenger traffic has really gone into the abyss in the second quarter. There's been some resilience in the domestic markets, as you can see from the yellow line, but actually the size of domestic markets in Europe is fairly small compared to other regions of the world, like North America and Asia. And this is why when you look globally, Europe's airports have been the hardest hit by this crisis compared to airports in other parts of the world. Make no mistake, in this crisis, there's no winners, there are only losers. You can see that there's very marginal differences in the way traffic has gone down between the different segments of our industry, from the big hubs on the left down to the smaller regional airports on the left. At the moment, we're going through a second dip, especially for airports in the EU, EEA, Switzerland and the UK. You can see here the latest traffic data, minus 86% decrease in passenger numbers. Conversely, in other parts of Europe, the traffic has been a bit more resilient, and that's mainly due to the continued dynamic of domestic traffic in Russia and Turkey. But all in all, what we've seen is that the airport ranking has been turned upside down. Look at this. In September, the busiest European airport was Antalya in Turkey, followed by Moscow Sheremetyevo and Moscow Domodedovo. And as of last Sunday, we passed the sad bar of 1.5 billion passengers lost so far this year for Europe's airports. So what's been the responses of airports? Well, of course, it's been about trying to survive, and that has meant slashing costs to the bone. Significant reduction in operating expenses. You can see here the figures from the top 20 airports in Europe. And that has involved also the temporary closure of some quite high-profile facilities like Paris-Orly or Milan-Linate. And this has come with a significant human cost, as airports have been forced to lay off staff. And this is not over. There's going to be more to come. Airports are handicapped when it comes to slashing operating costs because a large part of their costs are fixed and they have natural diseconomies of scale. Along with OPEX, we've reduced also capital expenditure. Again, here, the top 20 European airports, you can see the figures. And there too, there are limits to how much you can reduce those costs because part of them are regulatory driven, because you need to ensure essential maintenance, and because also, of course, you have projects that you've started that are nearing completion. And I think the emblematic project of all in that is, of course, the Berlin-Brandenburg Airport, which has just opened. But of course, when you're slashing investment, you're also questioning your long-term position for the future. What airports have done very clearly is also try to help out airlines and partners whenever possible. This crisis is systemic. All the air transport ecosystem is affected. This means there is no hierarchy in pain, and this means that there's no one-size-fits-all in responses. But we've seen airports waiving or deferring parking fees, and we've seen a lot of airports, 70% of them, also offering specific COVID-19 rebates and incentives to help the airlines. Those incentives have come on top of the existing rebates and incentives before the crisis. And what they mean essentially is that those airports at the moment are pricing at a loss in a desperate attempt to rebuild their air connectivity. Of course, from early on in this crisis, the priority was to stay open and get ready for the restart. And here I'd like really to thank very much EASA and the ECDC for their support. They quickly came up with the aviation health safety protocol that has given us the means to restart. At the moment, of course, as Arno mentioned, it's not about trying to do testing. 55 airports in Europe, accounting for 32% of passenger traffic, have taken various initiatives to do testing for their air passengers. In doing that, they're still moving ahead of governments because we are desperate to restore passenger confidence. Going into the outlook for the coming months and the years ahead, well, I think clearly since last week, we have a brimmer of hope with the news of an effective vaccine, and again, more fresh news this morning about that. But clearly that light at the end of this tunnel is still very far away. There are still too many unknowns. And that means that for the next months and next year, our outlook will remain dependent upon the epidemiological situation, travel restrictions, and quarantines. This means that our horizon is shifting and that we need to navigate uncertainty. And this means, of course, that for the moment, our terminal and facilities remain mostly empty. And I don't think the coming weeks will be any better because we know that airlines are at the moment cutting back on planned capacity for the coming weeks. Under these circumstances, it's clear that Europe's airports are facing acute business continuity risk. We are burning cash at the tune of 350 million euro per week at the moment. Mind you, this is still better than where we were in the second quarter, thanks to the massive cost cutting I've outlined before. But at the moment, 193 European airports are facing insolvency, and larger airports and hubs have taken debt to unsustainable level. The response from governments has been mostly inadequate. They have chosen to finance and support selectively some airlines, and not much has been done for airports until now. This is not just about our business continuity, but this is also about the integrity of the single market, and this is about societal risk because airports are formidable enablers of local and regional developments. Looking ahead, we know the recovery will be slow and uncertain. We continue to see a return to 2019 traffic levels only in 2024 or 2025. And the recovery will be coming with demand pressures. First, because we live in a time of anxiety. People are generally worried. Experts say this is the worst period since the Second World War from that perspective. The present times are more stressful than during the global financial crisis because COVID-19 touches on the physical integrity of people. And that means a lack of confidence, both in governments and businesses, and that means also changing behavior. At the moment, of course, it's all about staycations, but we're seeing increasing demand for local second homes, and that will possibly be at the expense of air travel in the future. Along with that, we know there's going to be reduced disposable income in this recovery. European states have gone from fiscal austerity to fiscal activism in a matter of weeks, and this has so far limited the economic fallout of the pandemic. But consumer confidence is extremely low, and we know also that when fiscal support will be withdrawn, we will face massive unemployment in Europe, and that will also impact demand levels. Adding to that the fact that the recovery in the long haul will take more time, and of course the fact that we are having reduced business travel. Of course, people will keep traveling for business because nothing beats meeting face-to-face when you need to make a deal and do business. But clearly, corporates have adapted. They've embraced video conferences because they had no choice, and they've seen that it works. And moving forward, when looking at business travel, clearly, cost-cutting will be a main driver to reduce that, as was the urge to achieve their own net zero targets. This is why McKinsey is forecasting that business travel could still be 20% lower in 2024 than it was last year. So clearly, VFR, leisure, and shorter trips will be king in the recovery, and that will essentially shape network and route development. Along with much pressure on demand, the recovery will be also about following on the supply shock, in the sense that airlines have made massive structural capacity reductions. At the moment, 30% of narrow-body aircraft and 40% of wide-body aircraft in Europe are grounded. We know not all will go back to operations. Airlines will be very risk-averse in this recovery, and you can't blame them. And at the same time, whenever possible, there will be very much yield focus. So all this means that our recovery will not be about going back to the market of 2019. We all have been structurally hit. What we're heading for is clearly a new normal, with changing fundamentals and changed market structure. And for airports, it will start with what we call the new airport operations normal. 9/11 did change aviation forever. COVID-19 is probably going to do something similar, because the new imperative is all about health, safety, and wellness, with a new categorization in our passenger segmentation. This means we'll have a different passenger experience at the airport and across aviation, and this is impacting our processes, premises, and people, and it will impact also our capacity, as a recent study from Eurocontrol has shown. And there, clearly, when you look at slots, we will need to go back to more normalized rules, hopefully by next summer. Looking now at the airlines, clearly we see low-cost carriers are the winners out of this crisis. Relative with a question mark, and I will come back to that in a minute. The largest low-cost carriers have the strongest balance sheets, and they have the liquidity to survive this crisis in the months to come. Their product offering is perfectly fit for the new reality, as is their cost management and their agility. So this is why we see Ryanair and Wizz Air really as the structural winners. These carriers will win market share, and who knows, maybe when the time is right, they will consider long haul. The caveat, of course, is that the concept of the flag carriers has made a comeback. Somehow in this crisis, aviation has become again the business of states. We are going back where we were 40 years ago. And this is not good news, because with that comes potentials for policy and regulatory bias. And at the same time, it means it might actually be more difficult for network airlines to achieve the restructuring they need to make, knowing that the way forward is about hybridization. And finally, and very importantly, I think when we look at the new normal, it's going to be also about lower traffic growth. I'm not talking here about something like peak air travel in the sense that air traffic would stop increasing, but I think we all need to be realistic. There are several powerful and structural determinants that are combining to reduce demand over the long term. There will still be growth, of course, but clearly it will be lower than what we've been used to. And here I'm obviously talking about the climate emergency. COVID-19 is a foretaste for what the climate and ecosystem crisis will entail from an economic perspective. I think we all ought to reflect carefully about these words, because what they mean is that sustainability is becoming the societal imperative. And that is resonating more and more with consumers, leading to changing lifestyle. The future is clearly going to be about less meat and less oil. But potentially, it will also be about fewer flights and more train, especially if us as aviation do not embrace sustainability. This is very much the way Generation Z people are thinking, and these people will be our future clients. Adding to the climate emergency, a pushback against globalization that will not go away. Aviation, of course, has been a formidable enabler and driver of globalization, and we've thrived on that. But now we see governments openly trying to control or even limit globalization. And at the same time, we see the shape of globalization changing. It's more about digital trade and less about physical trade. And all this ties with increased geopolitical instability, social unrest, and regulatory risk, with in particular the risk of protectionism. Who can tell what the future open skies for aviation will be? So clearly this will impact demand levels, and ultimately the question will be about the relationship that we've been used to between GDP and passenger traffic. I think we can't assume from that perspective that the future will be like our past. The impact on this new reality for aviation will be far-reaching. For airports, it means that our aeronautical revenues are under pressure. We see airports now at the moment competing for the restart and the recovery. In the future, they might compete also for a smaller pile. So clearly we see increasing airport competition, and this is being more and more recognized and acknowledged, including by academics, as you can see here from this very recent publication from the Competition and Regulation in Network Industries Review, which is very clear about it. No airport, no matter how large, appears to be able to escape competition. Clearly, it is high time for our regulators to catch up. In that context, it's clear that our regional airports will be ever more squeezed. Those airports were already facing structural profitability problems before the crisis. They'll need to reset, but they will need also policy and regulation to help. Then there's the question about the future of the hubs. Hub connectivity at the moment is on life support in the sense that we still have a few long-haul flights carrying passengers, but airlines are able to do so only because of the freight that is being carried. And indeed, if you look at the performance of hub connectivity compared to direct connectivity in this crisis, you can see that hub connectivity has been very, very much hit. Network airlines will be restructuring their network. They've already taken the largest aircraft out of their fleet, and they will operate less spokes potentially. So that means less need for feed. And clearly there, I think secondary hubs, especially those without strong local markets, will suffer and will be at risk. Again, we've seen direct connectivity increasing tremendously over the past years on the back of the low-cost airline model. And even hubs have seen low-cost carriers penetrating and taking a share, an increasing share of their direct connectivity. And of course, you have environmental pressures that also can question the hub and spoke model. Of course, the hub and spoke model will be here to stay because at its core, it is still very efficient from an economic perspective. But all that will mean that still, hubs will need to rebalance their reliance on hub carriers, which will remain very important, with also diversification. Once again, I think all this reflects and speaks of increasing airline dominance. Along with our aeronautical revenues, we're going to face also renewed pressure on our non-aeronautical revenues. Mind you, we've seen that since 2013, there was already a decreasing spend per passenger at airports. And clearly, with less disposable income moving forward, and also increasing familiarity with the internet shopping gained in this crisis, I think things are not going to get easier for travel retail. If you add to that lower volume growth, well, you kind of get the moment of truth. This is why we're seeing a lot of discussions at the moment about the system of minimum annual guarantees. That system is being challenged, it's luckily not gone. And all this is taking place against the background of significant consolidation between our concessionaires. So with such revenue pressures, both on the aeronautical and non-aeronautical side, what this means is that our airport economic model is potentially at risk. Why? Because our volume has been driven on the assurance of continued dynamic growth in passenger traffic. And that means that moving forward, that model may no longer be future-proof. And that in turn scares the questions about our ability to keep investing, because we will need to keep investing, and our ability to remunerate shareholders. All this, ladies and gentlemen, means that airports, just like many other businesses today, are facing the need to reset, to look again at their business model. In many ways, COVID-19 has been a great accelerator of trends and developments that were already in the making before this crisis. And Europe's airports themselves have been in a constant state of transformation over the past 20 years. And that is what has allowed them to come out as businesses in their own right. We must keep following that path to make airports more resilient, more agile, and above all, to ensure their continued relevance in a changing society. Of course, this is not something we can do alone. We need to move towards there with all the industry and our policy makers. But for us as airports, I think it really means following three main directions. First, as Arno said it, build back better. We need airports to become more sustainable and greener. Europe's airports already committed last year to achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2050. They're working on this through airport carbon accreditation, and indeed, on a global scale, Europe's airports are leaders there, with more than 160 airports already certified under the program and more than 50 having become carbon neutral. Today, we're upping our game. We're launching 2 new certification levels under our program, transformation and transition. In essence, those 2 new certification levels are about enabling airports to perfectly align their trajectory with the Paris Agreement. But of course, this is not only about CO2, it's about sustainability in the wider sense. This is why today we're also relaunching an update of our sustainability strategy for airports, taking stock of COVID-19. Again, this is about making sure that airports can act as powerful agents of social inclusions. The second strategic directions that airport will need to follow is to deliver it better, that is, to become hyper-efficient and hyper-connected. This will require major organizational and corporate flexibility and a continued focus on people development, which of course under the present circumstances is not very easy. But that will mean that we need to leverage further technology and data. Touchless, biometrics, sanitization, remote health monitoring, of course, under the current circumstances and moving forward. All of this will need to be enabled by data management and better analytics. At the same time, we'll need to pursue our agenda for operational integration with air traffic management and, of course, with new mobility. And I think down the line, to become more efficient, we need to keep an open mind about airport alliances, airport network, and possibly the need for airport consolidation. This could help rebalance our relationship with airlines, clearly, and at the same time, it can be a solution for smaller airports to ensure their survival. The third and the last strategic direction will be about expanding the pie. And what I mean with expanding the pie is a new look at our revenue generation. Aeronautical charges, of course. The user-based principles is a cornerstone of green policies. There will be no escape to it. But this is clearly something we need our regulators to align. Expecting airports to become ever cheaper for airlines is not realistic. And the old days where airports were used as instrument of subsidization of airlines are gone, although clearly we see some pressure to going back in that direction. But that means that we need to move towards more flexible, dynamic, and market-driven prices. Frontier economics has demonstrated the link between flexible airport pricings and increases in air connectivity. So we need to go towards peak and congestion pricing, and we need the freedom to do bilateral with airlines. Again, all this fits perfectly and actually supports the sustainability imperative. Looking at our commercial revenues, clearly we'll need to forge new relationships and look again at risk sharing with our concessionaires. The volatility we'll be facing will probably trigger some reassessment when it comes to doing commercial activities in-house or externalized. And there clearly there's no one-size-fits-all. But we need to get closer and closer to our concessionaires, to the brands, and we finally need to find a way to tap the potential of growing commercial revenues together with the airlines. That's still the holy grail. All this, ladies and gentlemen, is speaking about a new paradigm for industry cooperation. Is that possible? Is that realistic? Of course, each one will need to do its part. But very importantly, I see regulators also will need to play their part. We will need them to incentivize and create the right conditions for that cooperation. And we'll need them to be more market-driven and, just like us, to become more agile. So these strategic directions are needed to basically take the European airport model to the next level. And that will continue to mean combining B2B with B2C with B2P, business to people. Ultimately, it's about creating value and trust for all stakeholders. This is really, I think, at the core of the Great Reset today for any business and for the economy. It's about creating a better world. And I think that airports have the DNA for this, because we're already, and we have been and will continue to be, global business who care. As ACI, we release the challenge and will continue to stand by and for our European airports. I thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.